This photograph cost $13 billion to create, and 50 years. At 5:21 a.m. Venezuelan time, Donald Trump posted this image to Truth Social. Nicolas Maduro blindfolded on USS Iwo Jima in a grey Nike sweatsuit, plastic water bottle in cuffed hands, soundproof headphones, visible. Hours earlier, Delta Force breached Maduro's compound in Caracas during Operation Absolute Resolve. By dawn, the Venezuelan president and his wife were airborne, headed to face narco-terrorism charges in a Manhattan federal court. Trump's declaration, "America will now run Venezuela and seize control of the world's largest oil reserves, 303 billion barrels worth over $15 trillion. As of today, this is happening. U.S. forces struck military installations across northern Venezuela, suppressed air defenses with one-way attack drones, and extracted a sitting head of state in under 3 hours. This is current events unfolding right now. But here's what nobody's talking about. The drug cartels America just invaded to fight, we created them. Colombia still produces record cocaine levels after we spent $13 billion trying to stop it. Arresting drug lords in Panama in 1989, targeting cartels in Colombia for 25 years, and now invading Venezuela. Each intervention made the problem exponentially worse. 3 questions drive this story. Why does cocaine production increase every time we fight it? How do narco-terrorism charges become the legal justification for seizing oil reserves 5 times larger than America's? And if this is really about drugs, why does the exact same playbook work every 15 years? By the end, you'll understand why narco-terrorism is geopolitical cover, and why a 50-year pattern just repeated itself. There's a number that explains everything, a percentage so small it reveals why the war on drugs can never end. We'll get there. The hidden system. Start with geography. Colombia grows coca across 253,000 hectares, 2/3 of global cultivation. Peru adds another 93,000 hectares, Bolivia 31,000 more. Venezuela doesn't grow cocaine. It borders Colombia and offers direct Caribbean maritime access. That makes it the perfect transit hub, the highway, not the farm. The global cocaine trade generates $400 billion annually. That's 8% of all international trade, larger than the entire global steel industry. Colombia alone moves cocaine worth $15.3 billion per year. These aren't underground enterprises. They're parallel economies operating at Fortune 500 scale. The 2.6% rule. Here's the reveal you've been waiting for. Of all cocaine profits, only 2.6% stays in producer countries like Colombia or Venezuela. The other 97.4%? Captured by international criminal syndicates and laundered through banks in consumer nations, primarily the United States. Now, watch where the money actually goes. In 2008, Andean farmers earned $500 million from the $35 billion US cocaine market, just 1.4% of gross profits. Traffickers within source countries made another $400 million, 1%. Mexican cartels captured $4.6 billion, 13%. The remaining $29.6 billion, down 85% of total value, was generated after drugs entered the United States. Follow the incentives. Coca farmers earn poverty wages. Mid-level traffickers capture single-digit percentages. International networks capture everything else. Now, add interdiction. When the US spends billions seizing shipments, drugs become scarcer. Scarcity drives prices higher. Higher prices mean more profit for the 97.4%. The system doesn't fight drugs. It makes them more valuable. The pattern. You've seen this before. When America banned alcohol in 1920, organized crime didn't exist at national scale. Prohibition created the mafia. The policy itself generated the enemy it claimed to fight. When repeal came in 1933, bootlegging syndicates collapsed overnight. Drug prohibition follows identical logic. Nixon declared drugs public enemy number one in 1971 and created the DEA. That same year, the CIA helped overthrow Bolivia's government in the first documented cocaine coup, backing a regime involved in coca production while the DEA fought drugs in the same country. 1989. Bush invades Panama with 30,000 troops to arrest Manuel Noriega on drug charges. Noriega was a CIA asset who facilitated Contra operations, allowing cocaine to flow through Panama. When the relationship soured, narco-terrorism charges provided legal cover. The UN estimates 500 civilians died. Cocaine didn't stop, it rerouted through Central America and Mexico. 2000. Plan. Colombia launches with $13 billion in US funding to halve cocaine production. The program trained battalions, provided helicopters, and fumigated 75,000 acres of coca fields. By 2023, Colombia's cocaine production capacity had increased 53%. Each intervention creates power vacuums. New groups fill them. Production increases. The increased production justifies the next intervention. The cycle perpetuates itself. 2025-2026. Trump blockades Venezuelan oil exports in December, citing narco-state status. On January 2nd, he orders Operation Absolute Resolve. Within hours, invasion. The case study. The build-up. This didn't start on January 3rd. The legal groundwork was laid in 2020 when US federal courts indicted Maduro on narco-terrorism conspiracy, the exact same charges used against Noriega in 1989. The indictment alleges Venezuela's government facilitated thousands of tons of cocaine into the United States. Mandatory minimum, 20 years. December 2025. Trump announces oil blockade. CIA teams infiltrate Venezuela, tracking Maduro's movements, sleep patterns, routes. Naval forces assemble off Venezuelan coast. The US seizes multiple oil tankers, including Russian-flagged vessels. Trump makes a phone call. You have to go. Maduro came close to accepting exile, but refuses. At 11:46 p.m. Venezuelan time on January 2nd, Trump gives the final order. Operation Absolute Resolve 2 South a.m. January 3. Explosions rock Fort Tiuna military base and Generalissimo Francisco de Miranda Air Base. One-way attack drones, the first operational use by US military, suppress air defenses. Fighter jets strike communication antennas across northern Caracas. 3 a.m. Delta Force breaches Maduro's residential compound at Fort Tiuna. The location described as a heavily fortified military fortress. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, run for their steel safe room. They don't make it. 5:21 a.m. Trump posts the photograph. Maduro sits aboard USS Iwo Jima, blindfolded with soundproof headphones, holding a plastic water bottle in cuffed hands. Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirms arrest and impending charges. 6:00 p.m. The aircraft carrying Maduro lands at Stewart Air National Guard Base in New York. He walks off the jet surrounded by federal agents, enters a hangar, then boards a helicopter to Manhattan. An armored convoy takes him to a DEA field office for processing. Final destination, Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn. The charges. January 5, 2026. Maduro and Flores appear in Manhattan federal court before U.S. District Judge Alvin Hellerstein. Before pleading, Maduro speaks, "I am the president of Venezuela. I consider myself a prisoner of war. I was captured at my home in Caracas." Both plead not guilty to narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, and weapons charges. Hellerstein orders them held until at least March 17th. Senator Mike Lee relays that Secretary Rubio anticipates no further action in Venezuela now that Maduro is in U.S. custody. Translation: Mission accomplished. The Noriega parallel. The playbook is identical. Manuel Noriega was a CIA asset who facilitated Contra operations throughout the 1980s. When the relationship deteriorated, drug trafficking charges provided legal justification for invasion. December 1989, the US deploys 30,000 troops in a full-scale invasion. Around 500 civilians die according to UN estimates. Noriega is extradited to Miami, convicted on drug charges, imprisoned for decades. The cocaine didn't stop. It rerouted through Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico. Today, Mexican cartels control distribution into the United States, a direct consequence of Panama intervention, disrupting established routes. Two key differences. Maduro's capture required a targeted special forces raid, not 30,000 troops. And Maduro has backing from Russia and China, making his capture more diplomatically complex. But the pattern holds. CIA asset turns liability, drug charges provide legal cover, military intervention secures strategic resource. The prize Trump declares the US will run Venezuela until a careful transition occurs. America now controls 303 billion barrels of oil reserves, 5 times larger than US reserves, larger than Saudi Arabia's. Venezuela currently produces 900,000 barrels per day. Who wins? US energy interests gain access to world's largest reserves. Defense contractors plan Colombia's privatization model. Who loses? Venezuelan civilians face potential casualties and displacement. Regional stability as power vacuums form. And the cocaine. It doesn't stop. It never does. The consequences. The next 6 months, Venezuelan trafficking networks will fragment and multiply. This follows the pattern from Colombia after FARC demobilization. Remove one organization, 5 smaller ones compete for territory. New groups fill power vacuums, they fight for control, violence increases, cocaine routes shift. Probably deeper into Brazil, which already serves as an alternative transit zone. Suriname gains strategic importance. Rural Colombian areas expand production to compensate. Total cocaine output remains constant, or increases. Exactly what happened when Panama routes were disrupted in 1989. China and Russia cry foul at the UN. International law experts agree. A country cannot enforce its law on the territory of another state without consent, UN rapporteur tells Al Jazeera. But narco-terrorism charges provide legal cover the US considers sufficient. Watch the narrative shift. Once the US controls oil, narco-state rhetoric becomes less useful. Drug enforcement priorities quietly fade, just like Panama post-1989. The 5-year horizon Colombian cocaine production remains at record highs despite 25 years and $13 billion spent. Farmers doubled cocaine yield per hectare using more effective cultivation techniques. The UN confirms a 53% increase in Colombia's cocaine production capacity over the past decade. A new narco-state emerges elsewhere. Peru or Ecuador are prime candidates. Both border Colombia's coca-growing regions and offer Pacific maritime access. Ecuador already accounts for 2.4% of global cocaine seizures. Peru cultivates 93,000 hectares of coca, second only to Colombia. The geography creates the opportunity. US policy creates the label. The interdiction paradox perpetuates itself. Increased spending makes drugs scarcer. Scarcity drives prices higher. Higher prices mean more profit for cartels. More profit justifies more intervention. The cycle is self-sustaining because the policy produces the opposite of its stated goal. Venezuela becomes a US-managed oil producer with ongoing security concerns, permanent military presence. It's the Iraq playbook, Afghanistan playbook. Resources secured, endless occupation. The universal principle. When a policy consistently produces the opposite of its stated goal for 50+ years, the opposite is the goal. The war on drugs maintains the prohibition premium. keeps drugs expensive and profitable. It creates legal justification for intervention in resource-rich regions. It transfers wealth from producer nations, who capture 2.6%, to international networks, who capture 97.4%. It provides endless funding for military operations. Narco-terrorism charges are geopolitical Swiss Army knives. They can be applied to almost any Latin American leader when their resources become strategically desirable. Noriega controlled the Panama Canal. Maduro controls the world's largest oil reserves. The charges adapt to the objective. The revelation, the answer. Remember this photograph? This image represents the success of a 50-year investment, not in stopping drugs, but in perfecting the system that requires drugs to never be stopped. The paradox is resolved. America's war on drugs didn't create the cartels by accident. It created them by design. Because as long as drugs are winning the war, we keep needing bigger wars. The 2.6% rule explains everything. Producer countries get 2.6% of cocaine profits, but they get 100% of the blame. That's not a bug, it's the entire point. What happens next? Watch for the next narco state, probably Ecuador or Peru, both bordering Colombia's cocaine production zones. Ecuador moves 2.4% of seized cocaine globally. Peru cultivates nearly 100,000 hectares of coca. The pattern is now visible once you see it. There's one country we haven't talked about, the one where 97.4% of cocaine profits actually end up, the one whose banks launder the money, the one whose demand drives the market, the one whose policy created this entire system. But that's a different story about why we can't look in the mirror. Same charges, same playbook, different oil field,